right, welcome back, Sports Talker Nation. This is your host, the G-Man, and we continue our 2015 NFL review. Today we're going to talk about those Cincinnati Bengals. Difficult team to get your finger on. For much of the year, the Bengals looked like the dominant team in the league, but then, as usual in the playoffs, they just didn't play up to the standard they had set for themselves. This year, it wasn't Dalton's fault, but they're a team that has a habit of getting there and not getting over the top. You don't know what to do with a guy like Marvin Lewis because before Marvin Lewis, they were an absolute train wreck of an organization. And while I do think they let the inmates run the asylum a little too much in Cincinnati, he's a big believer in taking on reclamation projects. There have been some that have worked for him, so it's tough to fight that. But when it doesn't work, it blows up in spectacular fashion. Let's talk about what went right. Andy Dalton proved he was a good quarterback. He is more of a sum of the parts guy. You look at him and he is not overly fast and he's not overly big. And he doesn't throw an overly strong ball, but he does enough to win for them all the time. So I think you stick with Dalton. They did give him the money. A lot of people panned them giving him the money, but I'm okay with that. I think you can win with him. I think he's their new Ken Anderson. I don't think he's as good as Boomer Esiason. I've always loved Boomer Esiason. But I think he's that stable presence that I think with the right surroundings can win. From a running back perspective, that kind of fell off the table. They still have two very good ones. They just didn't match the performance they had previously. Whereas they have A.J. Green, who always seems to be dinged or injured. If we could ever get him to play 16 games, he could put up 1,800 yards receiving and 15 touchdowns. He is so super talented. He catches everything. His footwork is amazing. He runs great routes. He's been this good since he came out of college. I don't see that changing. So that certainly went right for them. Their tight end that they drafted out of that Notre Dame, wonderful player, turned into everything you expected he would be. So I think they are set from an offensive perspective. They're one of the few teams also that is actually in pretty good shape from an offensive line perspective. Their struggles with their running game were not offensive line based. I think they could always use some depth. Everybody could always use some depth. But from a pure production standpoint, their offensive line was pretty strong. Defensively, they did everything well. They have good defensive backs. They cover well. Their linebackers, while overly aggressive and downright stupid at times. Vontaze Burfict, I'm talking about you. Yeah, I'm sure if you listen to the podcast, you want to come fight me, but I don't care. You are a moron. You cost your teams multiple games. This is not the first time you've ever done this. Why don't you just play to your talent, which was first-round talent worthy, instead of your mindset, which managed to get you undrafted because you're such a lunatic? Cost them a lot of problems. From a play perspective, defensive line, spectacular. Always provide pass rush, great against the run. Defensive backs who can blanket receivers. Even Pac-Man Jones is one of those reclamation projects I mentioned. He's been born again. He's played unbelievably well for them. He's best as a third corner and a specialist, but I think you can start him in a pinch. What didn't go so well? Well, again, in the playoffs. They just can't seem to get over that hump. They can't say it's, of course it's Pittsburgh and it's always teams that they have familiarity with, but they just can't seem to get over that hump. And you can't put your finger on why. Offensively, they had Hugh Jackson, who has since moved on, so I think that's going to hurt them. But they have the skill positions. They even have a tight end, which is unusual. They have the offensive line. They don't have a glaring weakness. Or at least they didn't for much of last year. They did have some free agent defections. So as they move forward, I think they're going to need a little bit of help in the linebacker area because you simply can't rely on Burfict like that anymore. I think they need some defensive backfield depth. But they may be in one of the best positions of anybody to just take the best player available because they're not hurting at any specific position. Maybe they take a guy like a Jalen Smith out of Notre Dame that, tragically hurt his knee in the bowl game, but otherwise would have been a top 15 pick. They have the patience to just wait on a guy because they have no glaring hole that they need to fill. So I think moving forward, I think you expect more of the same as Cincinnati. I don't see them taking a big tumble. With all those pieces still in place, I do think Hugh Jackson might hurt them a little bit because I think he was a really brilliant offensive guy. So I think that might hurt them a little bit, but I think you can count on them to be 10-6, maybe even 11-5, continuing to fight in that division, either for a wild card or division championship. I think Freeman has to, or Marvin Lewis, not Marvin Freeman. I'm a Phillies fan, so I'm thinking of the pitcher. Marvin Lewis has to win a playoff game. Otherwise, even with all the success they've had, people are going to lose patience. He's going to lose his job. But for the most part, things are looking still in the upswing for the Cincinnati Bengals. And for me, this is the G-Man. That is our 2015 review of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I am out.